are here with Supply Chain Insiders. I am Gracie. I know I'm not your typical host. Had some technical errors, nothing flight related.
The other video did not make it.
Yeah, we made it, just not.
Yes, that video was fine.
I'm here with Craig Fuller. He is CEO and founder of FreightWaves, Firecrown, and many, many others. I've heard that you have diesel in your blood.
I do have diesel in my blood.
Yeah, you're what? You're on fifth generation now?
Yeah, fifth generation. Yep. My grandfather was one of the patriarchs of long haul trucking, so I've been around it my whole life. And I like to say I have diesel in my blood. This industry is in my blood. It gets in your blood. Supply chains win wars. He wants to reunite with Taiwan. Right. Liberation Day, it was absolute chaos. These drivers are driving, in some cases, 20 hours a day.
Is there a truck driver shortage?
No, it never has been. I had been fired by my dad. We at FreightWaves have driven a lot, have made it a sexier industry. I'm going all in. And this is insane. Donald Trump, when he came into office first term, it was shocking because while China had ascended both economically and as at least a regional rivalry, and I think that was largely well known, what I think Donald Trump did is it sort of brought it to the forefront as trade, because before that, there was very little pressure on trade. You know, China had largely won the 21st century in terms of taking a lot of manufacturing and development. And what Donald Trump did is he forced a conversation in terms of trade policy. It was sort of a new, and it was a shock. I remember back in 2017 and 2018 when he first did it, it was like, wait a second, we're going into a trade war, and that felt a little frightening, frankly, because you didn't know what was going to happen. But what we've seen since then is that China's economy has struggled. It has its own sort of domestic issues, but it's struggled as well because it's so export-oriented. So much of its economy is built on that. But I think what's also happened is that there is this awareness of the vulnerabilities. And I think COVID shocked everybody. Like, we became intimately aware that we are dependent upon this rival.
Right.
And so when COVID happened, the supply chain issues also happened. And that is what brought the vulnerabilities. Everyone became aware of the vulnerabilities we have. It was no longer tariffs before that, and the trade war before that was largely a price thing, a tax thing. People were worried about it from a cost of goods imported, but they weren't thinking about sort of the power dynamics were sort of not on the radar. I think what we learned during COVID, and the other sort of assumption I think people generally made about China, was that China was never willing to sort of risk its economic viability by shutting down the economy and we saw that during COVID. I think what's happened is post-COVID, now it's a national security question.
Like the power dynamic.
It's like, how much do we want our industrial base to actually be dependent upon a country that is a rival? But we have also the reason that the world has not had a major military conflict. And look, we've had episodic military conflicts, but there hasn't been a world war, largely because of the hegemon of the United States. The United States is very economic central. And look, I think arguably China has benefited from the United States as the sole superpower more than any other country, because it's been able to trade with the country. The American system that came after World War II has been the system of world trade and the world economy, and China's benefited from that. Right. And I think what we have to now face is that not only have they benefited from it, but they funded a lot of the investment in military products and military infrastructure and resources that have put certainly the Asian region at risk, but potentially the globe at risk. And I think because of that, and look, they've also made a statement. Xi has come out and talked about that he wants to reunite with Taiwan.
Right.
That would be devastating to the global economy because Taiwan is the epicenter of semiconductor production, and a large portion of our modern economy depends upon it. And I think if you're running a supply chain, you have to sort of consider these issues.
Yeah, and you started out that answer with this idea of globalization. And I think globalization can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but here on FreightWaves, we're probably looking at it through a supply chain lens.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you could tell the audience, provide a little bit of context of what globalization means to you, especially as it relates to our conversation. Before we do that, I do want to do a quick shout out to Craig Fuller's latest book, Moving the World. We're going to talk about that more in a little bit, but anyway, maybe on the globalization piece.
Yeah, look, I think globalization can mean effectively two things. It means that you have Thomas Friedman talked about the world as flat, and really the idea is that—
Wait, it's not?
Well, the concept that Thomas Friedman came out with is that the internet and containerization and all these technologies, the economy's emerged such that you can trade freely without obstruction or taxation. And that's what globalization means, is that you can source labor, you can source services, you can source products from anywhere in the world. And so that is one classic definition of globalization. The other thing that I think is also part of it is the free movement of people. Right. And this is really the jet age. The 747 is what has created this globalization of the free movement of people. And what's happening right now is the world is shifting because the United States no longer has the sole status as a superpower. It has a strategic rival both economically and potentially militaristically. And that is creating a world where there is a desire in China to create a two-rule system. Like, they want to operate under their rules.
Right.
Where they are dictating policy to the rest of the world, and the United States sort of views that as a threat to its global hegemony.
Interesting. So as China rises in the ranks, it's actually like decoupling globalization somehow. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You'd think that, or for me at least, as more and more countries gain power and recognition, notoriety, that would lead me to think that like this idea of globalization is strengthening, but actually the U.S. having a monopoly on supply chain is what like we're talking about in terms of globalization?
We don't have a monopoly. We've never had a monopoly on supply chain. I think what's happened is that China has become this magnet of both capital and industry.
Right.
In many ways, doing things that were unethical or ruthless in some terms, of getting businesses to open up production plants in China where they could steal the intellectual property.
Right.
They were basically reverse engineering all these industries. And look, I think what's interesting about history, and if you go back through, I'm talking centuries of history, is anytime you see a primary power in a region or in the world, there's this desire by the up and coming power to topple or threaten it. And the existing power does not take that kindly. And you can see it going back to, all the way back to, Sparta and Greece, and you see it where you go back to Spain, the Spanish Armada versus England, and these things end up in some type of military conflict. And I think that's what is scary about the situation, is that the amount of military infrastructure and supply chain infrastructure that exists in China for Americans is going to put, at some point, if it ends up in a military conflict or a hot conflict, that's going to completely put us on the defensive. And here's the reality: is
supply chains win wars.
Supply chains win wars, and it's the reason logistics and supply chains are the primary reasons that countries win wars. You can see this in the Ukraine and Russia.
Okay,
is that the logistics function in Russia is largely the reason that it didn't out-dominate Ukraine in the first part of the war, is that their inability to respond on the ground to logistics challenges. There was this scene in the opening days of the Ukraine war where all these tanks are rolling across the roads, going to Ukraine, marching towards Kiev, and they got stuck in the mud and they couldn't move. And that was a logistics issue.
Trains, planes, automobiles, trucks, barges, it's all in my blood.
As a kid growing up, were you obsessed with like all forms of transportation?
Absolutely. I just have always been fascinated by things that move. And airplanes always excited me because they're like defy physics. Like, we're only able to fly literally because of physics.
Do you think that you got into transportation because your family was in transportation?
For sure. Gravity. My dad certainly taught me everything he knew was part of the knowledge of trucking on me, and I became fascinated with it. We're about to land. We're going to do one pass and go, let them get some shots of it, and then we're going to do it.
Did you spend a lot of time at like the warehouses and stuff?
I did. I worked on docks. I worked in the trucking operation. So I did my time, cleaned out trucks, did the stuff that's kind of the grunt work that, as a teenage boy, that's the last thing you want to be doing is cleaning up old trucks that people lived in. Not the funnest job.
But now you know the nitty gritty.
It was definitely gritty.
Yep.
I worked in dispatch, I worked in operations, I worked in driver management, worked in fleet management. I did breakdown.
No, you were forced into doing the grunt work so that you
Usually it was called attitude adjustment. My dad was mad at me. Usually because of something I did to my mom. And my mom would be like, your dad is going to take you to work. And it was a punishment.
Were you a behavioral child?
I was certainly getting in trouble. I'm a middle child. It's sort of like built into the DNA.
It seems like you're something of a history buff. I mean, you're talking about supply chains all the way back to the Spartan days and the Greek days and the Spanish Armada falling to the English Empire. And going back to moving the world, it's kind of written a little bit like an encyclopedia. It's very factually based. Very factually based. And wanted to maybe just ask, I mean, some of your knowledge is coming to life here in the conversation. Like, tell us a little bit about like how you see, like, do you see yourself a little bit as an historian, your writing style? Would love to just like unpack that a little bit.
So I got, during COVID, when supply chains became interesting for normal people, like average people, I was getting a lot of inbound, and Bloomberg has this podcast called The Odd Lot. They do big macroeconomic things, but they do like really strange economic stories. Like they started covering supply chains, and on that show, they're like, what books do you recommend about supply chains? And I was like scratching my head of, there aren't many books. The Box is sort of the classic supply chain book. It's about the history of containerization. And I couldn't give a bunch of recommendations. And so I got talked into writing a book I've never written. This is the first book I've ever written. I thought it was gonna be easy. It was absolutely miserable. It took me 3 years to finish it. And it's written, it is certainly written as more of a sort of historical, like you can move around the book. You don't have to read it chronically. It's not a story per se. It's a bunch of facts about the history of supply chains. I had a lot of fun researching it. There were a lot of things I had no idea about, but we cover everything from Sears was the most powerful retailer to this crazy fact in the book.
I want to ask you about something that you said in your book, which is this idea that for every, what was it, like $1 million in Temu or Shein sales, what was the number that you gave?
So for every $1 billion of sales through Temu or Shein, we lose 6,000 US jobs.
6,000 US jobs.
Yeah.
But then we also, as US consumers, we want obviously the best deal on everything that we buy. So we're looking for the benefits of having, the most affordable manufacturing. But we also want to preserve our labor here. So how do we combine those two things? Is it a fantasy to be able to have the best of both worlds?
There's always been this rub in supply chains and in the economy for low-cost goods and this drive. And Walmart did it in the 80s, trying to drive down the cost of goods for consumers. And consumers largely benefit from cheaper goods. But then you have this other problem is it's no longer US retailers. Due to the internet, mobile devices, TikTok, and Chinese retailers have figured out how to tap into direct to consumer, uniting the factory to the consumer, effectively cutting out all the middlemen, which are typically US businesses. Companies like Amazon and Walmart, Dollar General, are getting cut out of that entire workflow, the entire commerce flow. And this is what happened with manufacturing. Like China imported all of these factories, this intellectual property, this knowledge to China and became this manufacturing powerhouse, but American retailers still own the American consumer.
Right.
But what we've seen over the last couple of years is this massive shift. TikTok is one of the primary reasons this is happening, is that Chinese businesses are able to reach American consumers directly, which means the dollars that you spend when you buy from Temu or Shein, those dollars are going into Chinese-based retailers, undercutting American businesses and American jobs. This is the ability for businesses to sell, Chinese businesses to sell to American consumers has existed since the birth of the internet. Alibaba was sort of one of the primary sources where Americans went. The difference is that 5 years ago, you would go online, go into Amazon or go into these websites, you would see these ads, you could tell it was not an American business. It would be written in Chinglish or like, it was just very obvious that you didn't know who your counterparty was.
Right.
With AI and the ability of these language learning models to make it so easy and make a Chinese-based business to look equivalent to an American business, all of a sudden the value of that comfort that you have that there's an American retailer that is going to be responsible has gone. And so there's this rub in consumer circles where they want the cheapest goods possible, but then there's also rub of at what cost are we willing to allow these Chinese companies to effectively leech off of our economy.
If you had the rights to write your own policies on global trade, tariffs, what have you, like, what do you think the right structure would be?
I think the administration messed up.
Where?
So they put trade tariffs on, Liberation Day was a bit of a zoo. Like it was absolute chaos. So they came out and said, hey, we're gonna put tariffs on the whole world. And they created this, and it was like, and we saw this massive escalation on China because basically any country that retaliated is what Donald Trump said, that he's just going to keep inflicting pain on them, an acceleration of tariffs. The problem that you had with Liberation Day was no one understood the logic behind it, and it was abrupt, and it caused a lot of pain in the economy, and I think it sapped a lot of industrial expectations. The other problem is not only did we have tariffs on China, but we were putting tariffs on some of our other trading partners and allies, places like Canada, places like Europe, Mexico, that really are not strategic rivals. If I were in the administration, what I would have done is place tariffs specifically on China. And I know the argument is that they'll just go across the Vietnam border, and you can see this in the data, or Thailand and Malaysia, and therefore they'll bypass the entire tariff regime. But there are ways that you could put it regionally based. I certainly wouldn't have put it on Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
And then I would have applied pressure on those countries to prevent border skipping by having their own tariffs put on Chinese imports. And I think that would have been a much more effective outcome than what we have seen from any country that was allowing border skipping or transshipping. You would go penalize them for doing that and not make it such a shotgun of approach. And I think that caused a lot of pain. And I would have been a one and done, and I would have said, this is effective in 12 months and had given people enough time and absolute certainty. I would have said, this is the final rule. And so that's not what we got from the administration. We got this very, every day you wake up to a news report or a tweet and you're like, man, here we go again. And that was, I think, caused a lot of problems.
Well, the perfect segue, how politics are literally driving supply chain is something, there's a hot topic going on right now about how these driver compliance regulations are being enforced more strictly. And it's estimated, I think you might have estimated that some 600,000 truck drivers are going to be maybe forced to come off the road. Wondering how you see that enforcement either stripping away power from certain supply chains or transportation companies, or maybe giving more power to others.
So the 600,000 number did not come from me.
Okay.
There's an economist, his name is Noel Perry, who is a transportation economist, who wrote, it was a blog post by J.B. Hunt, where he went and looked at all of the data of current truck drivers that are likely to be impacted under this compliance crackdown that's taking place by the administration. So really what's happening, there's a couple of threads here, is that the administration has a view of immigration, which unfettered immigration is bad for the economy. Mm-hmm. It's caused inflation. It's also really taken jobs from, particularly blue collar jobs, and in many cases white collar jobs, taking those jobs away from Americans. And you see this in African American communities, you see it in Latino communities, where jobs that are typically low skilled are being impacted by much cheaper labor that come with people who are not born here, and this has caused a lot of economic problems. Yep. It certainly existed in the Midwest and the industrial sectors, but it exists across our economy, is when you have cheaper labor coming in, people that are charging far less, is you don't have, the market is not able to increase the wages available to other people, to American-born citizens. And so what's happening is the administration, because this is sort of their core audience, is now using the power of the federal government to basically do these deportations.
Right.
And they're looking for every single angle on the immigration story they can get. And they've discovered that a number of the truck drivers, and let's say it's 20%, because if you take 3 million commercial truck drivers at 600,000, are not in compliance with immigration rules, nor compliance with the regulations that govern trucking.
Yep.
So non-domiciled is only about a third of that. You have DACA recipients and people who have expired permits. You have people who went to CDL mills that didn't get properly certified. And so this is ground central. It fits the administration's goals of cracking down on immigration. It fits the administration's goals of using the immigration story to also drive some of their other economic policies. And it fits because it's wrapped in this safety question about truck drivers. Are these truck drivers that are on American roads safe? And here's what we have in trucking. We have a safety crisis. Fatal accidents involving heavy duty trucks are up 40% since 2014. That's a really disturbing fact. There's 5,000 fatal accidents every single year that involve heavy duty trucks. Now, oftentimes the driver is not responsible for it, but we should do everything in our power to ensure the safety of the rigs that are on our highways.
Absolutely. Because
our families are driving them, and so that's the first thing. The second thing is we have a security crisis.
Right.
Like right now, the cargo crime and freight fraud that continues to happen in our industry is happening. It is an absolute travesty that this is a plague that is gone viral and has grown exponential. And it's many times orchestrated by foreign actors are taking advantage of the lack regulation. And oftentimes, while they're perpetrating and committing these crimes originated from overseas, they're coordinating with people that come from their same backgrounds, that are in their same social networks, with drivers that are here in the United States that are helping perpetrate these crimes. So a driver that is connected to someone from an organized crime syndicate overseas, living in America, is not from America, and they're going in and basically picking up cargo and stealing it. And this is a crime that should worry every one of us. Verisk, which tracks insurance data, has come out and said that cargo crime is up 63% in a year. And we're talking a multi-billion-dollar industry. This is a major problem. So we have a safety crisis, we have a security crisis, and I think everyone in trucking knows that we have an economic crisis in the industry. This great freight recession has been caused by too much capacity on the roads. And so the administration is trying to resolve those issues through the lens of immigration. And I think the public's going to support it because they're able to tell a story with fact that we have a safety problem.
It sounds like you are also supportive of this initiative.
I'm supportive of having compliance crackdown for sure. I think we have too much capacity. It has gotten to the situation where companies that operate compliantly cannot compete against companies that don't. These non-compliant foreign carriers are paying drivers 40 to 50% less per mile than what an American-born truck driver is making. They're willing to skirt the rules. They're willing to drive. American truck drivers are given 11 hours a day to drive a truck. These drivers are driving, in some cases, 20 hours a day because they don't care about the rules. And I think that's a major problem. It's not safe, and it undercuts American businesses significantly. I'm all for immigration. In fact, I have a libertarian bent.
A what?
I'm a libertarian, naturally.
Okay.
Libertarian means you should be able to do what the hell you want. But actually, what I've seen in our industry is that the change of eliminating the barriers to entry that's happened over the past decade, and it's not just the immigration story, it's all of this concept of this truck driver shortage has been told to the American public by organizations like the ATA, the American Truckers Association. And the whole motive behind that was to make it easier for truck drivers to enter our industry. And initially what happened is they came out with this non-domiciled CDL rule, which was intended, when it was passed in 2017, to allow people that were born in, or military folks that were deployed living in one state and residing in one state, to be able to walk into the DMV of the state that that's the residence, and be able to get a driver's license. That was the original intention behind non-domiciled CDLs. When the final rule came out in 2019, they changed the language to allow foreign-born citizens to get an American truck driver's license, to get a CDL. But in that rule, they stated that the person must demonstrate that they have the right to work, and the CDL must expire at the same time that their work permits do. Problem is, a number of the states did not enforce that. And it's a red and blue situation. It doesn't matter, we're talking conservative states or liberal states. There was a number of states that did not actually check the documentation to ensure that the person had a work permit.
Right.
So that happened in 2019. Then we saw this massive immigration during COVID that took place. The Biden administration had a sort of open border policy, was their view. And that allowed so many new people to come into the United States, and they're all looking for work. And there's no better place to find an easy to work than trucking. They also got rid of the English language mandate.
Right.
In 2016, this also happened. And then they did one of the two other things that absolutely destroyed the industry's economics. They created this thing called the electronic logging, the ELD device mandate that came out in 2018, and it eliminated paper logs.
Yep.
And it sounds great on paper, like literally, hey, we have these electronic devices that can monitor the hours that a driver can drive. But what they did was they said it should be self-certification. So the device manufacturers can sell a company a device, but what those device manufacturers did was they put a back door where the fleet or the driver could edit the hours of service. So now when the driver gets pulled over, and this is true of anybody, like any background, American driver, foreign driver, it doesn't matter. But when a driver gets pulled over and the state trooper is like, let me see your log, it looks on the device as if the driver's compliant. The driver is not compliant. And because paper logs were eliminated, the paper trail is effectively gone. The software looks as if the driver's compliant. And so what's happened is these foreign companies have created these electronic log devices.
Yeah.
And they're selling it to U.S. American trucking companies or companies that operate in the United States, and they're allowing them to edit their hours of service. So now we have a problem because the companies that are compliant are only allowed, the drivers that are doing things right are only allowed 11 hours a day. But a driver that doesn't care could drive 20. That's insane.
That is insane.
Then to top it off, which is absolutely ridiculous, they came out with something called the entry-level driver training program. So before that, there was basically there's 3,000 accredited truck driving schools across the country, and a truck driver should go through some type of training and get signed off that he has met the requirements for a CDL and is able to go to the DMV and apply for a CDL.
Right.
What they did was they said in 2022, that any entity that's registered in the federal database can actually certify that the driver's completed the work. And think about this perspective. It used to be that it would take 6 to 12 weeks of training if you've never driven a heavy duty truck to go through a training program. You would go in, you would learn, you would have a classroom, you would have in-field, you would be trained to deal with all sorts of situations. You would know how to deal with things like traffic and weather and winds and snow and all the things that you should know as a truck driver. A very regimented thing. And it cost about $10,000. It wasn't cheap.
Yeah.
The trucking companies would pick up the bill typically. And so that was the way it used to work. What happened with the ELDT mandate, the entry-level driver training program mandate, was that it allowed any entity to say that the driver was proficient.
Right.
And it went from getting your CDL in weeks, 6 to 8 to 12 weeks, to days.
Wow.
So here's the problem. A person who's never driven a heavy-duty truck, perhaps is not familiar with the English language, who has not driven on American roads, is now getting in a heavy-duty truck with a day or two of training, can pass the CDL test because they're taught to pass the test, and now these guys are on the road.
That's wild.
This is insane.
That is insane.
And so we've lost because of our erosion of barriers to entry. And it's not just the immigration story. I want to be very clear. It isn't about immigrants itself. The immigration story is a part of the story. But it's this idea that we've eroded who can become a qualified truck driver. We've said that training consistency is not important in this quest to solve this truck driver shortage. And so what's happened is that practically anybody willing to drive a truck can get a CDL because there's very little training required. And these people are unqualified to drive, and now these backdoors on how many hours they can drive. There's a backdoor in the fact that they may not speak the language or understand the customs or whatnot, and may have not even passed a proper CDL test. It is absolutely insane.
That's wild. One word answer. Is there a truck driver shortage?
No, it never has been.
Never has been.
All right. Are you ready to share with me your scariest flying experience?
I got a couple of them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like,
you won't know it until you land.
Oh, well, true. Well, what do?
You just have to let gravity take over, and you just kind of hope you turn the engine off. So it happened twice, and then both times were in Nashville.
Well, I think you have some bad juju in Nashville. Did you do something you weren't supposed to do?
No. One is, I've had 2 times that brakes didn't work. Nashville is like this weird spot. The second time was much more scary because the first time it happened was on the runway. The second time it happened, I was actually parking the airplane right by this jet.
Oh no!
And I was like, oh my god! I was like right in front of it, and I just happened to turn off the engines, and it died. Like the plane stopped rolling. That was it. I've also had an exhaust pipe crack. That was kind of scary. I've had not in this plane, but I had this plane that would become convertible.
Is what?
The top would fly off. So I landed one night.
It's the worst.
It was scary.
That happens.
It was one evening I was flying out of Oxford, Mississippi. We do. And it was cold, which is important because it got really fucking cold. But I had just taken off, and all of a sudden I hear this explosion. And the top, the canopy just flew open with that. And luckily, I had enough training to know what to do. Just keep flying the airplane no matter what happens, and you just kind of ignore it. And it happened 2 or 3 times in that same airplane.
Oh my
I
God.
don't own the airplane.
What?
Yeah, this is not.
You're like, actually, this is the one.
Yeah, this is not going to happen today.
I want to talk a little bit about you as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
You have started quite a few companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many companies have you started?
I don't know.
We don't even know.
I don't know. I mean, it's when
Can
you're
we
an
get it?
entrepreneur. Well, I've started like a lot. The ones you don't know about, the ones that don't matter. Like I think half a dozen that you would know that are still around,
Yeah.
and many more that aren't. I think as an entrepreneur, it's both a curse and a blessing.
Can we get an official number?
Anyone who's ever started a business often gets coached. Don't do this. Don't take the risks. This is likely to fail. Do you really want to do this? Do you want to ruin your career? Do you want to ruin your reputation? What happens if it fails? And I think as an entrepreneur, to be successful, you have to kind of burn those boats. We cover the most iconic stories like Convoy that shut down, that failed. We cover bankruptcies. We cover startups that don't make it. I can tell you, because of the news cycle moves so fast, is that if your business is not successful, within days or weeks, and oftentimes maybe the same day, people will have forgotten about it. Most people, particularly in those early phases, will not care.
Right.
Like it's not going to be a story that is going to follow you for many, many years. So when I started FreightWaves, I had some money, but not a lot, basically to support my children. I had been fired by my dad, and that was a tumultuous experience. I've been written out of the family, if you will. My dad goes, don't ever be a CEO. You'll be a bad CEO. Don't become an entrepreneur. You'll be a bad entrepreneur. My dad really tells me this. That's pretty tough to hear a man that I've idolized my whole life, who's been a very successful entrepreneur, tell me that I am not good enough to be him or be him. But it also motivated me. And what it did was it made me realize, so I had some successes and I had some failures. And at one point I had hundreds of people working for me in payments. I had a payments company called Transcard. And my dad was the only investor in that business and had fired me and basically cut me out of that business. And so I had gone from managing hundreds of employees, running this really fast growth payments company to basically nothing. Not having any identity, having a job, but not, the only way to get out of the circumstances I was in, which was being an employee and making a decent salary, but not enough to really achieve the goals that I want and not to take the risk. I remember being like, this kind of sucks,
Right.
just sitting here and having all of this energy and ideas and wanting to go do something. And the only thing that has been holding me back is the fear
Right.
of failure. And I remember going and telling my now wife that I'm going to do this. And we'd only dated for 2 or 3 months. She never knew me as an entrepreneur. And she was ready to move to Texas. She was living in New York in Manhattan. And she was trying to talk me out of it. She's like, but please, go get funding first. Because I didn't have enough money to start it. I agreed to do that. And the next day she came to her apartment. I was staying in her apartment. And I quit my job. And she's like, what? I said, I quit. I'm going all in. And she's like, well, I thought you agreed. That was the first time I broke a covenant to her. And I was like, no, I'm going all in. And I didn't have enough money to fund it. The only thing I had at that moment in time, I had enough money to put my kids into school and pay their bills, but not a whole lot of other money. But I had good credit because all of the banks were still underwriting me based on my old income. And so I opened up these zero interest APR credit cards from Bank of America.
The good old days.
$50,000 line of credit with zero APR for 6 months. And so I funded FreightWaves initially with credit card debt. And I didn't care. Like, so what if it fails? Like, it's $50,000 of debt. Like, I could pay that off and,
The good old days.
I will make enough money in my life to pay that off.
Yeah.
And who cares? Like, I am not going to stay in this miserable situation of working in a job in a business I didn't believe in and wanting to be back in the game. Like, so what if FreightWaves, and the original idea behind FreightWaves failed. Like, the idea to create a futures market based on trucking failed miserably. It never worked. But out of it, I discovered I had a knack for media And I discovered that the market needed data from Sonar, and we built a great business out of it.
Starting FreightWaves is your biggest risk that you've taken in your career?
I don't know what the biggest risks are.
To me, it sounded like maybe breaking that first covenant with your dad. That might have been the biggest risk.
Well, look, I don't know. I don't know that starting FreightWaves was a big risk because the downside was so infinitely small. The problem with founders is the dopamine curve, man. When you're first starting out in a business, I remember like the first little wins.
Yeah,
like someone, I remember the CEO of a company that probably no one's heard of, a company called Clarkson's out of the UK. It was a trading house. And I remember the CEO responded to me and I was like, oh my gosh, like that was a huge dopamine hit. Or I remember the first $1,000 that we sold, the Stripe account hit and it was $1,000 hit the account. Those were huge dopamine hits. Or getting our first investment, that was a huge dopamine hit. And the problem as a founder, once you sort of built something up, the dopamine hits get harder and harder. And I have a high degree of risk tolerance, but I also have a desire for dopamine hits. I'm a dopamine addict, like most entrepreneurs.
Adrenaline junkie.
And so it's not even, I mean, adrenaline is one thing, and maybe that's a side, or that is by definition dopamine. But adrenaline, the way I get it is by taking these types of risks because I think it's important. And that's what drives success.
I suppose, as always, the biggest risk is probably just not taking the risk. It might have been a bigger risk for your health, for your state of being, to stay in that job. You also mentioned being fired by your father at which company was that?
Transcard.
So fired twice.
Yeah, by my father.
Was that was that expected? Did you know that you had maybe done something that you shouldn't have?
I was fired at US Press too. My dad's trucking company. There's two fundamental things that happened at Transcard. One is I had an alcohol problem and I was drinking quite a bit. I'm sober for 10 years and I'm quite proud of that. Thank you. I'm quite proud of that. That was a journey. Maybe I'm 11 years in now. I can't remember. It's been so long that I've forgotten about it. But yeah, which is probably, of all my accomplishments, that's probably the one I'm most proud of because it's enabled everything else in my life to be successful.
It's a decade plus.
So that was one thing. The other thing was, this is a technology business. And just like Pallet, these technology businesses, as they scale, require more capital. My father had started a business that became a very successful trucking company called US Express. And that's a cash flow business. Like, people don't raise venture capital to go start a trucking company. They might go borrow money from the bank, but it's a bootstrap business essentially.
Yep.
And my father, as the business grew, the business started to consume more and more cash, more and more capital. And I wanted to go raise outside money. He didn't want to raise outside money because he felt like he was already in
the black.
No, he felt like he had invested a lot of money and he was afraid to be diluted. He was also afraid of an investor coming in and trying to control and basically take the business away. And so we got to a point where cash was tight. And again, my risk profile pushes me to push the envelope on things. And it got to the point where the business was struggling for cash reasons. And combined with some of my own personal demons, he felt like it was time to make a change. And he did. Put my brother in charge, which was even that much more dramatic, who I'd hired. And I left. I left town. Chattanooga's a small city. We have a well-known family in Chattanooga.
Yep.
And when you run a business that's been fairly high profile here, it was a fast-growing technology business that's in payments. That reputation follows you. A lot of my social network were based on my business. And so I sort of disappeared from Chattanooga for a couple years, and that's where I sort of sorted out what I was gonna do next.
I think you refer to this as the wilderness years?
Yeah, I was in the wilderness. Very depressing. I mean, I was really severely depressed because I was effectively cut out of the family. I'd always had that backstop, and I'd lost that. I lost my father's trust, which I think is probably the most traumatic part of the whole thing. It wasn't so much to get fired, that happens.
Yeah.
But to lose his trust, and it's not a normal employer relation, very personal. And I'd always idolized my dad. And so losing his trust was the most dramatic part of that.
Like a personal level.
Even though the business didn't file bankruptcy, I was effectively bankrupt in that business. And so I spent a while mourning, like you do a relationship. And I think more importantly, founders get their egos attached to it, especially when they've been winning and all of a sudden, it's the first time I'd really failed in business. Business had always been sort of a natural thing to me, but I'd truly failed in it. I remember just mourning for a while and being super depressed about, and a lot of it's just it's that ego, man. That ego reinforces these negative thoughts. And I think a lot of times that's what holds founders back is their ego.
Is that something that you learned, that sentiment that, the ego is what's driving these behaviors, and that no one really cares about your ego as much as you.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I certainly learned that if you can move beyond your ego, you can take risks. Because I didn't want, for a year, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was ashamed.
Yeah.
And I was embarrassed. And I felt like I had lost. And these were just self-defeating things. And going through a process and waking up one day and being like, I'm going to go do this again.
Yep.
Was pretty rewarding, because now that I've seen how bad it can be, or at least how bad it feels, maybe not how bad it can be, because there's certainly far worse things in life than what I went through. That creates a level of humility, but it also makes you never want to go back to those days again.
Totally.
And I think it's easy to get caught up in your own story. So much of my life growing up was idolizing my dad. My dad was this powerful executive, went in and he built a business that by the time he sold it, had 12,000 employees, 10,000 trucks. He was an icon, or is an icon, of the trucking industry, but he built this Fortune 1000 company. And I wanted to be my dad, but I also wanted to beat my dad. I wanted to be the next generation that sort of leveled up. That drove me, when I was younger, it drove me to learn everything about this industry, which has driven a lot of what we put into FreightWaves. And I have an enormous amount of admiration for my father, because that was who I wanted to shape my own life. And my son came to me, he had been a lifeguard at the pool, making $12 an hour. And he'd made nothing, he made an allowance before that, and I was making some money. At the end of the summer, after realizing how little $12 an hour goes, being a lifeguard, working 5 hours a day or something, he comes to me at the end of the summer and goes, Dad, how do I make real money? And I was like, well, I think you got to start a business. That's where most wealth is made. And he's like, how do I make money? How do I start a business? And so we started some things that didn't, they weren't successful. And there was this business called AeroSwag, which is this website that sells custom products for pilots. In fact, I've got an example of this right here. So this is a map for aviation. And so you can do like t-shirts and phone cases and stuff of any airport in the country, a bunch of airplanes. And the guy had done $6,000 a year in revenue the year before. And he had the site listed for $10,000. It's like, I'm going to buy that. Like by the way, that's cheaper than college tuition. That's cheaper even than high school tuition. Like that's not a huge risk to take. Make a little bit of money. I think the guy had made like $1,500 last year. I was like, I'll buy that. So I did. We bought it for $10,000. And within the first couple of months, we had grown it to $40,000 to $50,000 in top line, making margin. Now, there's a little bit of cheat code to that, because I happen to own a lot of aviation media outlets and able to drive content, but it was a chance to spend time with my son working on a project where he got to learn how to start a business. Now, he's moved on to other things, and he's actually working on a different business plan right now. But it was a chance for the period of time when he was engaged in it. Like, we still own the business. The Fire Crown owns that business. But it was a chance for my son to kind of get the learnings of, how do I drive customers? How do I acquire customers? How do I retain them? How do I think about what to charge for a product? How to design a product?
Your father and your father's father was also an entrepreneur?
Correct.
Come from a long line. There's a long line of entrepreneurs here.
It even goes back a further generation.
Further generation.
Four now.
Five with your son.
5 generation, of entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And that's actually not uncommon. Like, one of the biggest predictors of entrepreneurship is that they have a family member, to go a father that's an entrepreneur. And there's a saying, your dad is the only man that wants you to be better than them. Mm-hmm. Only man. True. And your father is the one person that cares about your success that no other man will care about. And so I want that for my son. And so I am certainly helping him on his journey, and I will help him on his journey. And look, is that a cheat code? Absolutely, as it should be. But most founders have some person that's mentored them, some access that's mentored them. Yeah. My dad did not invest in FreightWaves when I started it. Remember, he told me I'd be a bad entrepreneur.
Right. Yep.
He didn't make any calls on my behalf, but I definitely used my family name and my dad's reputation as a gateway to gain access to his network. And I tell my son, that's your greatest resource. Your greatest resource is for him is his name and my reputation, my dad's reputation, his grandfather's. That is his greatest resource, and he shouldn't be ashamed of that. And for many years, when I was younger in college, I was ashamed of that, because I thought somehow that diminished my own work, that somehow was just trading on that. And what I realize now is, I've made it my own. Like, FreightWaves is my own, but I've been able to benefit from the knowledge that my dad imparted on me, my love of this industry, but also this access to it. I don't think it diminishes it at all. Some people say that. I don't give a care.
I think Mark Cuban just said recently that in like 5 years or 10 years, there's going to be two types of companies: companies that are really good at AI, and then companies who used to be in business. In the world of transportation and logistics, where do you see AI being like actually leveraged for real ROI and real outcomes and actually driving revenue and money? And where do you think it's like going to fizzle out? Where is it not really applicable?
Well, look, I think we're somewhere in the Gartner hype cycle.
Yeah.
Like we definitely are.
Yeah.
You can look at the stock market bubble that's happening. The companies, a lot of the startups that have raised a lot of money based on an AI story, there's definitely a bubble there. Now, the problem with bubbles is you don't know when it's going to pop or how it's going to pop or who the winners are. And so you have to sort of play the game.
Yep.
There's certainly a lot of folks chasing the front of office and transportation. So these are automated call centers, freight negotiation, brokerage negotiation, track and trace, exception management, all that stuff. So there's a lot of noise around the front of the office where a customer is engaging. I am least confident in those functions because those are the ones where the customer, transportation is a relationship-driven business.
Yep.
And when we first started to see AI come about where it was customer facing, it was, whether it's in freight brokerage and drivers would call in and not realize an AI agent was there, they were okay with it because they thought, hey, I'm talking to a human. It sounds very human. That sort of story is wearing off because a lot of the drivers, a lot of the people in the community are aware it's an AI agent. Like that, you're no longer surprised by how good the AI is. I think the opportunity is in the back of the office. It's in things that are not visible to customers. Because if the relationship, and everyone says it's in transportation, it's a relationship business. If that's true, then a computer is never going to have a relationship. I mean, although people are certainly trying, the computer's not going to have the personal relationship with the human element that is so inherent in these relationships. And so I think the front of the office, the front customer-facing stuff, or the facing the drivers or facing the capacity providers, that probably isn't going to be the value proposition. That is sort of overhyped.
Yeah.
I think it's the back of the office.
What are some of the back office business processes in logistics that come to mind?
So exception management, track and trace, those are sort of core parcel. Billing, collections, risk management, looking for problems inside the workflow, identifying transactions that are likely to fail.
Yeah.
Applying data to a business model.
Yep.
Applying data in terms of pricing. Those are things at the end of the day that businesses have built into the systems that customers want and desire, and that adds like pricing models and decision models add value to the customer experience, but they don't want to wait for the answer. And so that is where some of the back office functions really matter. But when it comes to negotiating with a customer, I think that's probably the worst use of AI because that's still a customer relationship where relationships matter.
When we look back at your career, when it's all said and done, what's the impression that you want to leave with the industry?
So I think one of my missions is that I think transportation is really cool. I think it's interesting. I think it drives the economy. I think, and I think FreightWaves has been influential to this, is that we have brought awareness to a much broader, there's been this natural evolution of supply chains where there's this broader awareness and respect for it happen anyways. But certainly we at FreightWaves have driven a lot, have made it a sexier industry, have made it a cooler industry. We get to tell the stories that go along with the founders. We get to document the real-time information. Before FreightWaves came along, there was no really active storytelling. A lot of this was tribal knowledge. It was my father telling me stories about various trucking companies or various players or various technologies. There was no real media source. That information was not there and was not preserved for future generations to learn. My goal is to continue to elevate the story, to drive the stories that matter and to bring awareness to the issues and to do it in a very contextually and informed using data to inform those conversations. And I think that's my biggest, everything else I do in my life, that will be secondary to actually bringing an industry that I love to where people understand the issues and the opportunities. And maybe my next act will be my greatest, where actually we're able to move the trucking conversation into popular culture.
So elevating awareness and elevating the perception of transportation and trucking is Would you say that?
I think it will be one of my greatest contributions. I mean, think of, you ever watch Landman?
Yes.
I would like to see that happen in trucking. And maybe we'll see something like that, where we can take a public art form where you have this entertainment, show-based entertainment, a little bit of drama, a little bit of soap opera, and turn it into trucking. So Landman for trucking may be my next greatest act.
I will be tuning into that.
Stay tuned.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks, Greg.
Appreciate it.
It's been awesome chatting with you.
They brought an extinguisher. Like they're like, hey, we're ready to call the fire department and stuff if it didn't work. But luckily, I was able to get it down.
So basically, you're a master multitasker. You are both flying and problem solving, and
This is
also
definitely good
figuring
for.
out what to do.
This is definitely a wartime CEO hobby. Because like when things go south, you're just like, all you gotta do is rely on your training and quick decision making.
I think this makes you a better CEO. The ability to multitask and stay calm.
Right. All right. So I'm gonna basically shut down our engines,
Okay.
and we're good.